everybody, this is the Wikstrand back again in the purple room, and let's talk for a second about some other aspects of Conan the Barbarian. The Milius cut. So last week I finally saw Zack Snyder's Justice League and it was fine. It was an okay movie. It could have been a really great movie had it not been 4 fucking hours long. Jesus Christ. We have to stop these madmen putting out 4-hour version of 2-hour movies. Totally contradicting what I just saw, I would just like to say that I would kill to see the original Milius cut for the Conan the Barbarian. Not because of its length and because of, that some characters would be better fleshed out or all that good stuff, but because it was so uber violent, it was ridiculous. In the autobiography, Arnold talked about that the original, Milius cut was, almost psychotic in how violent it was, because John Milius apparently is a fucking lunatic. For instance, the sequence where Conan's mother is killed, it's very nicely shot because you're seeing it from Conan's point of view, the head falling down and then she falls out of his hand and stuff like that. But in real life, he falls to doom, decapitated her, and the head apparently flew away, and blood spurting everywhere and stuff like that. If that is remotely how awesome this could have been, I would kill to see that. We're probably never gonna get the Milius cut, but one can hope. But it's not gonna happen, is it? King Conan, Crown of Iron. Back in the late 90s, there were rumors that Arnold was gonna go back and do another Conan movie. The movie was going to be called King Conan, Crown of Iron. The story was going to be similar to Hour of the Dragon. It's one of the longest stories of the Robert E. Howard's Conan story. It's basically when Conan has taken the throne of Aquilonia and has ruled there as a king for a while, and he has an uprising and he's presumed dead in a sort of way that resembles the Achilles storyline from Troy. As we all know, this thing never happened. What we instead got was Kull the Conqueror, which is a good supplement, I guess. Yay! That movie was not very good. One of the key reasons why I think we never got King Conan, Crown of Iron can be boiled down to Arnold Schwarzenegger's heart surgery, which he did in the mid to late 90s. I can't exactly remember which date it was at the moment, but anyway, there was a lot of movies Arnold was scheduled to do around turn of the millennium. On Wings as Eagles, I Am Legend, The Crusader. On Wings as Eagles never resurfaced. As we all know, I Am Legend was delayed, and then was a movie with Will Smith. And The Crusaders actually turned out to be Kingdom of Heaven. And anyway, after the heart surgery, there was a lot less movie projects offered to him. In his autobiography, Arnold talks about that he was seen as more vulnerable and more difficult to ensure, or whatever it was. But you can pinpoint this one to around 96-97. The amount of movies he made after that and the quality of them drastically declined, and probably King Conan was one of the victims, I guess. The Orphan Story, correctly made. How many stories have we seen about fucking orphans who are sad? Harry Potter and stuff like that. It's probably one of the key elements to it. My father is dead and I'm sad now, and stuff like that. This is the coolest version that has ever been made about it. And Conan never, sheds tears, and he's never sad about the fact that his mother and father was killed before his very eyes by Thulsa Doom and his thugs. He's been, chained to these kids, and then they just grain sands or grain beads or grain corn or whatever they're graining with this thing. And he never complains. He just turns into this behemoth of a man that looks like it's carved out of fucking marble. I don't know, but that is the way of making the Orphan Story badass. And let me tell you something, it wasn't a DVD extra when John Milius talking about when Arnold makes his appearance when he's when he rises up and you see his face. Apparently there was a lot of motorcycle guys was in the theater, and they just went whoa. I can understand them. It's a fucking awesome sequence. The world's greatest soundtrack. As I said in my Westeros review, Basil Polidoris created really the greatest soundtrack of all time. In the DVD extra, he talks about that how do you create a soundtrack that sounds like it would have been made 10,000 years ago, and that was the approach to it. There are slower moments, there are more atmospheric moments, there are these hulking monster moments that is so cool, and the love theme is fucking great. But all of this accompanies sequences which features absolutely no dialogue. We have the sequence with the Atlantean sword where Arnold falls down into this chamber or something like that. He takes the sword from the dead king. It's, how long is it? It's like 5-6 minutes. It is just Arnold comes down into a chamber and he takes a sword from a skeleton, and he gets rid of the dust, and now he has a sword. It goes on for 6-7 minutes. You don't know what's gonna happen, but the music tells the story about the history and all that stuff, and they explain so much more about the character and about the settings and everything about this world without having uttered a single word, and I think that is so freaking awesome. Also, I totally stand by the fact what I said about the title sequences. It is so freaking awesome, and it is also so cool that when the evildoers attack the village, that they're having these choirs and atmospheric stuff that more sounds like something Rhapsody would compose or something like that, rather than having more evil villain soundtrack stuff. Also, yes, Blade Runner is an equally awesome soundtrack, when considering the entirety of the soundtrack, but there is one more that could, claim to be one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, also composed by Basil Polidoris, and that is of course Starship Troopers, one of my favorite movies of all time with one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. Damn, I forget stuff sometimes. We call him the Teflon actor because Max von Sydow has been in some of the worst movies you could imaginable, some of the silliest and most insane stuff you can imagine, and yet all the behind the scenes stuff that you see when you're talking about Max von Sydow, they always say that, oh, he's a legend and he worked with Ingmar Bergman and he did this, that and that, but they never say, oh, he was so great in Conan the Barbarian. Why the fuck was he in Conan the Barbarian? It's so weird. But anyway, King Ostrich is of course the catalyst, the guy who sends them away on their merry way to try to free his daughter and whatever, and we never see him again for the rest of the movie. This might have to do something to do with the fact that Thulsa Doom had some evildoers or cronies that killed Ostrich in a weird sequence where they very slowly stabbed him to death, and apparently Max von Sydow had so much blood flowing through him that it must have been like 3 Max von Sydows hiding under King Ostrich's ample clothing or stuff like that. Personally, I think the scene added nothing, so I'm kind of glad they didn't do it. And when you're seeing the deleted scenes, it looks kind of clumsy and it looks ineffective and it looks just kind of sad, so yeah, I'm happy they didn't do anything about that. A relationship not built on words. Valeria and Conan's relationship is, in my opinion, kind of awesome. When they meet the first time, when they're climbing up this tower to steal some stuff, it's basically, they say, you're not one of the guards, and she says no, or if it was vice versa, I can never forget that. If it was vice versa, I don't know, I can never remember it quite, but the fact of the matter is that, Valeria may say, things to Conan, but he never says anything back. Their entire, relationship is basically based on not words. I guess the sex was really great, because Conan doesn't seem to be a lot of a, guy for, speaking about what he feels like, or what they're gonna have for dinner, or if the roof needs, new tiles or something like that. It's unique, but it really, really does work. Because too many movies believes that if you're gonna have a relationship works, you just say, you know, I love you, and then you keep telling the woman or the man how much you love them, and that'll do it. But Sandra Bergman and Arnold have such fantastic chemistry together that they don't need words. You believe them through and through, because she's such a badass and he's such a badass, and she doesn't need to prove that she's a badass for us to know that. We can see that she's a Valkyrie, ready to, you know, chop some evildoers up and, you know, him equally. It was a perfect fit. And it is one of these cases that I'm really, really sad that she died. I'm really sad that they weren't a team for, you know, movies that ultimately would not be made, but just the concept of, you know, them together, I think is kind of cool. It's one of the low-key best on-screen couples, maybe in the entire 1980s, I think. A movie not built on words either. There are large sections of this movie that has absolutely no dialogue. And as we all know from two of the best movies that has ever been made, 2001: A Space Odyssey and Mad Max Fury Road, you don't need words to get a movie rolling. They can sometimes be an asset to you, or they can sometimes be a hurdle to you. In this case, I love the fact that we don't have unnecessary dialogue in this movie. It would just be unnecessary. Like, for instance, the sequences where Subotai and Conan you know, becomes more and more successful in their thieving, and they're becoming more, you know, wealthy and stuff like that. And that is a passage of time sequence which really works, mostly because of the fantastic soundtrack, which, you know, adds these small little layers to everything. Also, the entirety of the breaking into the towers is awesome. The sneaking into Thulsa Doom's, you know, pleasure dome that they're having there with, you know, cooking humans and whatnot. And as I said, the Atlantean sword. When they're kicking ass and taking names, it is unnecessary to have dialogue also. And a sequence like the crucifixion sequence where Arnold is, you know, nailed to a tree and he bites a vulture to death is also a sequence that could have been, you know, if it would have been made with somebody else, he would have had some inner monologue and, you know, thinking about what am I doing here, blah blah blah. You don't need to drown your movie in dialogue all the time. Sometimes the images speak for themselves. Just look at Vertigo. Terminator or Conan the Destroyer? Which one was the franchise killer? So, 1984, Conan the Destroyer came out. The same year, The Terminator came out. Both very important movies for Arnold. Now, when they did the sequel to Conan the Barbarian, it was with a completely different director, with a completely different crew. They had moved out of Spain and instead, you know, shooting this thing in California with a lesser budget and a PG rating. That was not a very good movie. There were a few sequences that kind of made sense, but you had silly stuff like, you know, his Rob Schneider-like sidekick, Grace Jones yelling all the time, Boombata, the biggest man I think I've ever seen in my entire life, on, you know, the screen that was, you know, intimidating but nothing else. Silly special effects and a pretty laughable story overall. I mean, if John Milius would have done that, it could have probably been a kind of okay movie, but it was just too silly, and the movie has aged terribly. On the one hand, so that movie Arnold was not very happy about, but 1984 also as I said, saw the release of The Terminator, a movie Arnold really loved. This was a movie where he really got to shine as an actor, because has there ever been a performance by Arnold that has been as good as The Terminator? I think not. The Terminator changed Arnold's career fundamentally. Now he was seen as this, you know, big action hero, not necessarily just as Conan. So future projects kind of, fell through. And because Conan the Destroyer wasn't a big hit, wasn't beloved by critics or fans, but the Terminator was. Who can say who was the true franchise killer? So was it because Terminator was such a good movie, or was it because Conan the Destroyer was such a lackluster movie? Who really can say? James Bond. The idea behind Conan the Barbarian was, we're going to create a franchise not unlike the James Bond franchise. Every second year it's gonna come another Conan movie, and it's going to be, this ongoing thing, like a big TV show, or like the James Bond movies, where they could have potentially explored a lot more of Robert E. Howard's world, and, as time went by, they could have, added more awesome special effects like that, and Arnold, could have, grown as a character, and Conan could have been a more complex character, and you could have, explored all of these fantastic places. But it wasn't to happen. So after Conan the Destroyer, future attempts at making, a third Conan movie fell through. As I said, was it the Terminator, or was it Conan the Destroyer's lack of, goodness that was the villain in this one? I don't know. 1985 saw the release of Red Sonja, which Arnold has damned to be one of the worst movies he has ever been a part of. He was tricked into, shooting more sequences, and, they're saying that, oh, this wasn't good, we have to shoot this one again. So this small cameo eventually turned into, second billing behind Brigitte Nielsen, who, was the mad arse they had decided was going to play the buxom redhead. And, well, of course, she had the height to do it, and she had the physique to do it, but she was a terrible actress, and Red Sonja is a terrible movie. Whether or not it is as terrible as, let's say, Conan the Destroyer is an argument that would probably never be quite solved, because both of them are pretty terrible, but I wouldn't go so far to say that this is a movie I would punish people, saying, look at this fucking thing. You could argue that Red Sonja is the end of the Conan character, because, Red Sonja and Conan has, crossed paths once or twice in the comics and stuff like that. I didn't know that much about the entirety of the comics of Red Sonja before I saw the movie. It was far later. So that was just some other aspects of the fantastic movie of Conan the Barbarian. Join me next time as we'll take a look at some other movies, reviewing so and so from, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.